A gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Wildwater, Arizona Territory, in 1878, sending Grace Zimmerman diving behind a water trough as the stagecoach robbery unfolded behind her. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a wild Mustang as she clutched her carpetbag tighter, the wedding veil inside being her most prized possession, the last gift from her mother before consumption had claimed her just 3 months prior. Nobody moved. A gruff voice bellowed as boots stomped across the wooden boardwalk. Hand over your valuables, and nobody gets hurt. Grace peered around the edge of the trough, watching as 3 masked men waved pistols at the terrified passengers. Her breath caught in her throat when one of the bandits turned in her direction. Ducking back, she pressed herself against the rough wooden slats, praying he hadn't spotted her. "Hey you!" Behind the trough. Her prayer went unanswered. Rising slowly, Grace raised her hands, her fingers trembling. "Please, I have nothing of value." The bandit stalked toward her, his eyes dark holes in the dirty bandana covering his face. "Let me be the judge of that." He yanked the carpetbag from her grasp, rifling through it with dirty hands. "Please," she begged. "The veil is all I have left of my mother." The man pulled out the delicate lace, examining it with a grunt before stuffing it back. "Worth something to somebody, I reckon." He shoved her against the trough. "Stay put if you want to live." Tears burned her eyes as she watched him join his companions, her mother's veil now among their stolen treasures. The bandits mounted their horses, sending dust swirling as they galloped out of town, leaving behind shaken passengers and an overturned stagecoach. Grace slid down to the ground, her back against the trough as tears streamed freely down her face. Her journey west had been fraught with hardship since leaving Boston, first her mother's passing, then her father's gambling debts forcing her to flee to her only remaining relative, an aunt she'd never met in the Arizona Territory. And now this her mother's veil, gone. "Miss, are you hurt?" A deep voice asked, startling her. Grace hastily wiped her tears, looking up to find a tall man standing before her. His broad shoulders were outlined against the bright Arizona sky, the silver star pinned to his vest catching the sunlight. "No, I'm unharmed," she managed, trying to compose herself. "Sheriff Ethan Granger," he said, offering his hand. "Those were the Blackwell gang. They've been hitting stagecoaches across 3 territories." She took his hand, allowing him to help her to her feet. "Grace Zimmerman. They took my mother's wedding veil. It's all I had left of her." Something in the sheriff's blue eyes softened. "I'm mighty sorry to hear that, Miss Zimmerman. Where are you headed?" "Copper Creek. My aunt runs a boarding house there." Sheriff Granger nodded. "Martha Zimmerman's place? That's about 20 miles west. Stage won't be repaired for days, though." Grace's heart sank. She had exactly $3.42 to her name, not nearly enough for a room at the hotel she'd spotted when the stagecoach rolled into town. As if reading her thoughts, the sheriff said, "There's a wagon train heading to Copper Creek tomorrow morning. I can arrange passage for you, if you'd like." Relief washed over her. "That would be most kind, Sheriff. But I couldn't impose." "No imposition," he interrupted. "My deputy's wife is traveling with that train. You'll be in good company." That night, Grace lay on a cot in the sheriff's office, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. The jailhouse was empty of prisoners, and Sheriff Granger had insisted she take the spare room while he kept watch at his desk. Through the partially open door, she could see him cleaning his revolver by lamplight, his profile strong against the shadows. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness she hadn't felt since her mother's passing. With that thought warming her more than the thin blanket, Grace finally drifted to sleep. Morning came with the scent of coffee and the sound of boots on wooden floors. Grace smoothed her rumpled dress as best she could before emerging from the back room. "Morning, Miss Zimmerman," Sheriff Granger said, holding out a steaming cup. "Coffee." "Thank you." She accepted it gratefully, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. "Wagon train leaves in an hour. Mrs. Dawson, my deputy's wife, is looking forward to meeting you. I don't know how to thank you for your kindness, Sheriff." He smiled, and something fluttered in Grace's chest. "No need for thanks. It's my job to look after folks." The wagon train consisted of 7 wagons, mostly merchants and families heading west to settle. Mrs. Dawson, a cheerful woman with a round face and kind eyes, welcomed Grace with open arms. "Any friend of Sheriff Granger's is a friend of mine." she declared, making room on the wagon seat. Grace glanced back as they departed, finding the sheriff watching from the edge of town, his hat tipped slightly in farewell. She raised her hand in a small wave, feeling an unexpected pang at leaving him behind. The journey to Copper Creek was arduous but uneventful. The wagons moved slowly through the rugged terrain, the sun beating down mercilessly during the day while nights brought a bone-chilling cold. Grace helped Mrs. Dawson with cooking duties, grateful for the distraction from her thoughts, which alternated between memories of her mother and curious wonderings about Sheriff Granger. On the third day, as they crested a hill overlooking a narrow canyon, the wagon master suddenly raised his hand in warning. "Riders coming," he called out, his voice tight with tension. Grace peered ahead, her heart leaping into her throat at the sight of 5 men on horseback galloping toward the wagons. Even from a distance, she recognized the bandanas covering their faces. "It's them," she whispered. "The men who robbed the stagecoach." Mrs. Dawson clutched her arm. "The Blackwell gang. Lord help us." The wagons formed a hasty circle as the men approached, rifles appearing in the hands of every able-bodied man among the travelers. Grace huddled with Mrs. Dawson and the other women inside one of the wagons, listening to the demands being shouted outside. "We don't want trouble," the wagon master was saying. "We're just simple folk heading to Copper Creek. Hand over your valuables, and we'll be on our way," came the reply, the voice chillingly familiar to Grace. What followed was a tense negotiation, ending with the travelers surrendering a portion of their goods and money. Grace trembled, thinking of her mother's veil already in the bandits' possession. Would they recognize her if she emerged? Would they take what little she had left? Just as the bandits were preparing to leave, shots rang out from the ridge above the canyon. Grace peeked through a gap in the wagon canvas to see a group of riders descending rapidly toward them, a familiar silver star gleaming on the lead rider's chest. "It's Sheriff Granger," someone shouted. The ensuing gunfight was brief but fierce. The bandits, caught by surprise between the wagons and the lawmen, quickly found themselves outgunned. 2 fell wounded, while the others surrendered after finding escape routes cut off by the sheriff's posse. When Grace finally emerged from the wagon, her legs shaky beneath her, she found Sheriff Granger securing the last of the bandits with rope bindings. "Sheriff," she called, hurrying toward him. "How did you know?" He straightened, wiping dust from his brow. "Had reports of the gang heading this direction. Couldn't let them hit another group of innocent folk." His eyes softened as they met hers. "Didn't expect to find you among them, Miss Zimmerman." As the captured bandits were loaded onto horses, Sheriff Granger approached one of them, the very man who had taken Grace's carpetbag. "Where's your stash, Jensen?" he demanded. "Don't know what you're talking about, lawman," the bandit spat. Granger grabbed him by the collar. "The lady's wedding veil. Where is it?" The man's eyes darted to Grace, then back to the sheriff. "Cave. About a mile back. Everything's there." 2 hours later, Grace stood in a hidden canyon cave, staring at the pile of stolen goods the bandits had accumulated. Sheriff Granger moved methodically through the items, setting aside things that matched descriptions from recent robberies. "Is this it?" he asked, holding up a bundle of white lace. Grace's breath caught as she reached for it with trembling hands. "Yes," she whispered, carefully unfolding the delicate veil. Tears welled in her eyes as she ran her fingers over the intricate patterns. "Thank you, Sheriff. I never thought I'd see it again." "Ethan," he said quietly. "My name's Ethan." She smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Ethan." That night, the travelers made camp near a small creek, the mood celebratory despite the day's dangers. Grace sat by the fire, her mother's veil safely tucked away, watching as Ethan spoke with the wagon master. There was something about the way he carried himself, confident but not arrogant, strong yet gentle, that drew her gaze again and again. When he finally approached her, offering a plate of stew, her heart quickened embarrassingly. "May I join you?" he asked. "Please," she replied, making room on the log she was using as a seat. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the crackling fire and distant conversations creating a peaceful backdrop. "What awaits you in Copper Creek?" Ethan finally asked. "Besides your aunt, I mean." Grace considered the question. "A new beginning, I hope. After my mother died, there was nothing left for me in Boston. My father—" She hesitated. He gambled away our home, our savings. When the creditors came, I had little choice but to leave. I'm sorry, he said, his voice gentle. That couldn't have been easy. What about you? She asked. Have you always been a lawman? Ethan gazed into the fire. Since the war, fought for the Union, came west afterward. Seemed like folks out here needed men willing to stand up for what's right. And your family? Lost my parents to fever when I was 16. No siblings. He shrugged. The badge is my family now, I suppose. Something in his tone made Grace bold enough to ask, is that enough? Their eyes met across the firelight, and for a moment, she glimpsed a loneliness that mirrored her own. Used to be, he answered softly. The next morning, Ethan announced he would accompany the wagon train the rest of the way to Copper Creek, having deputized 2 men to return the captured bandits to Wildwater. Can't be too careful, he explained to the grateful travelers. Might be more of that gang around. Grace couldn't deny the relief she felt knowing he would be near for the remainder of the journey. Each evening, they found themselves gravitating toward one another, their conversations growing deeper, more personal. She told him about her dreams of becoming a schoolteacher, while he shared stories of his adventures enforcing the law across the territories. You'd make a fine teacher, he said on the 5th night, as they walked a little apart from the camp. Got the patience for it, and the kindness. Perhaps Copper Creek needs a school, she mused. Actually, they do, Ethan replied. Town's growing fast with the copper mine bringing in workers and families. Hope bloomed in Grace's chest. Truly, he nodded. Might be worth mentioning to the town council when we arrive. 2 days later, the wagon train rolled into Copper Creek just as the sun was setting. The small mining town bustled with activity despite the late hour, with saloons doing brisk business and miners coming and going from shifts. Aunt Martha's boarding house stood at the edge of town, a 2-story white building with green shutters and a well-tended garden, an oasis of gentility amidst the ruggedness of the frontier town. Grace felt a flutter of nervousness as Ethan helped her down from the wagon in front of the house. What if she doesn't like me? Grace whispered. Impossible, Ethan replied with a smile that made her pulse quicken. The door opened before they could knock, revealing a tall, slender woman with graying hair pinned severely atop her head. Her stern expression melted into one of surprise and then delight as her eyes fell upon Grace. Grace Zimmerman, she breathed. My goodness, you're the spitting image of your mother at your age. Aunt Martha. Grace managed, suddenly overwhelmed. Thank you for having me. Nonsense, child. Your family. Martha's gaze shifted to Ethan. And who might this be? Sheriff Ethan Granger, madam, he said, removing his hat. Had the pleasure of escorting your niece and the wagon train from Wildwater. Martha's eyes twinkled with interest as she looked between them. Is that so? Well, Sheriff Granger, you must join us for supper. I insist. That evening, seated in Martha's cozy dining room with 4 other boarders, Grace felt the first stirrings of belonging since her mother's death. Her aunt, despite her initial stern appearance, proved to be warm and welcoming, clearly delighted to have her sister's daughter under her roof. You'll stay the night, of course, Martha said to Ethan as they finished dessert. I won't hear of you heading back to Wildwater in the dark. Ethan cleared his throat. Actually, madam, I've been considering a change of scenery myself. Copper Creek Sheriff is retiring next month. Mayor asked if I'd be interested in taking over. Grace nearly dropped her teacup. You're staying in Copper Creek? His eyes met hers across the table. Thinking on it. Seems like a nice town with good people. Later, as Martha showed Ethan to one of the spare rooms, Grace stood on the back porch, breathing in the cool night air and trying to calm her racing thoughts. The door opened behind her, and Ethan stepped out, moonlight silvering his features. Your aunt is quite a character, he said, coming to stand beside her at the railing. Grace laughed softly. She is indeed. I think I'm going to like it here. I hope so. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Grace, I should tell you. I didn't just happen to be following those bandits when I found your wagon train. She turned to face him. What do you mean? I was following you, he admitted. Couldn't stop thinking about you after you left Wildwater. Used the bandits as an excuse. Grace's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Why? Ethan took a step closer. Because in all my years out west, I've never met anyone like you. Someone who made me think there might be more to life than just wearing a badge. Before she could respond, a shout from the street interrupted them, a call for the sheriff. Ethan's expression shifted instantly to alert concern. "Stay here," he said, hurrying toward the front of the house. Grace followed despite his instruction, reaching the front porch in time to see Ethan confronting 3 men in the street. One was bleeding from his arm, supported by his companions. "Mining accident," one explained. "Doc's not in his office." Ethan took charge immediately, helping the injured man toward the doctor's house at the end of the street. He glanced back at Grace with an apologetic look before disappearing into the night. The next morning, Grace awoke to find Ethan had left a note with Martha, explaining he'd been called to investigate a dispute at the mine and would return that evening. Disappointed but understanding, Grace spent the day getting acquainted with her new home in the town. Copper Creek was larger than she'd initially thought, with a proper main street boasting a general store, 2 saloons, a hotel, a bank, and various other businesses. The copper mine that gave the town its name employed over 100 men, and their families had established a growing community. Martha introduced her to several prominent townspeople, including the mayor and his wife, who expressed great interest when Martha mentioned Grace's desire to teach. "We've been trying to establish a proper school for months," the mayor's wife explained. "Have the building nearly finished, but no teacher. Would you consider it, Miss Zimmerman?" By evening, Grace's head was spinning with possibilities. She had tentatively accepted the teaching position, pending approval from the town council, and Martha had shown her the small cottage behind the boarding house that could be hers if she wished for more privacy. "It needs work," Martha admitted as they inspected the dusty 2-room structure. "But it would give you your own space." As they returned to the main house for supper, Grace spotted Ethan riding slowly up the street, looking weary but satisfied. Her heart leaped at the sight of him, a reaction she could no longer deny or explain away. Supper that night was a livelier affair, with Ethan sharing sanitized versions of his day's adventures for the benefit of the other boarders. Grace found herself watching him more than eating, noting the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how his hands moved expressively as he spoke. After the meal, when the other boarders had retired to their rooms, Martha tactfully announced she had accounts to review, leaving Grace and Ethan alone in the parlor. "I hear congratulations are in order," Ethan said, settling into the armchair across from her. "The town's new schoolteacher." Grace smiled, pleased he'd heard the news. "Nothing's official yet. The council meets tomorrow. They'd be fools to turn you down." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock and the occasional pop from the fireplace. "I spoke with the mayor today," Ethan finally said. "Accepted the sheriff's position." Joy bubbled up inside her. "So you're staying in Copper Creek?" "I am." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Grace, there's something I need to ask you." Her breath caught. "Yes. Would it be improper for me to call on you?" "Properly, I mean. With your aunt's permission." Relief and disappointment mingled strangely in her chest, relief that he wished to court her, disappointment that his question hadn't been more definitive. "I would like that very much," she answered truthfully. The weeks that followed took on a pattern that brought increasing joy to Grace's life. Mornings were spent organizing the small schoolhouse and preparing lessons for the 12 children who would be her first pupils. Afternoons often included tea with Martha and other ladies from town, as Grace was gradually welcomed into Copper Creek society. And evenings were for Ethan. Sometimes they simply walked through town, his badge gleaming in the lamplight as townspeople greeted them. Other times they sat on Martha's porch, talking late into the night about their pasts, their dreams, their growing feelings for one another. A month after her arrival in Copper Creek, the school officially opened. Grace stood nervously before her pupils, children ranging from 6 to 14 years of age, watching her with curious eyes. As she began her first lesson, she spotted Ethan standing in the doorway, his smile giving her courage. That evening, he escorted her to the town's first proper social event since her arrival, a harvest dance in the newly constructed town hall. Grace wore her best dress, a deep blue that Martha had helped alter to better fit the current fashion, with her mother's locket around her neck. "You look beautiful," Ethan said when he arrived to escort her, his usual confident manner replaced by an endearing nervousness. He himself had traded his dusty work clothes for a clean black suit that transformed him from rugged lawman to distinguished gentleman. The dance floor was crowded with miners and their wives, merchants, ranchers from outlying areas, and various townspeople. Grace felt eyes upon them as Ethan led her through the doors, heard the whispers that followed. The handsome new sheriff and the pretty schoolteacher were already the subject of considerable speculation in town. "May I have this dance?" Ethan asked as the musicians struck up a waltz. Grace nodded, allowing him to lead her onto the floor. His hand at her waist was warm and steady as they moved together, and she marveled at how natural it felt to be in his arms. "You dance very well, Sheriff," she teased. "A surprise from a man who spends his days on horseback." "My mother insisted I learn," he replied with a smile. "Said a gentleman should know how to waltz, even in the territories." As the evening progressed, they danced several more times, took refreshments together, and accepted congratulations from townspeople pleased with both their new sheriff and teacher. It was near midnight when Ethan suggested they step outside for some air. The autumn night was cool and clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. They walked a little way from the hall, the music fading behind them. "Are you happy here, Grace?" Ethan asked suddenly. She considered the question seriously. "I am. More than I thought possible after losing my mother. The children are wonderful. Martha has been so kind, and the town feels like somewhere I could belong." She glanced at him shyly. "And there's you." Ethan took her hands in his expression earnest in the moonlight. "Grace, I need to tell you something. I've never been good with words, especially not about feelings." Her heart began to race. "You can tell me anything, Ethan. When I first saw you in Wild Water, hiding your tears after those bandits took your mother's veil, something happened to me. I've seen plenty of folks in distress in my line of work, but there was something about you." He shook his head, seeming frustrated with his inability to express himself. "I couldn't get you out of my mind. That's why I followed the wagon train, why I took this job in Copper Creek." "Ethan, please, let me finish before I lose my nerve," he said with a nervous laugh. "What I'm trying to say, Grace, is that I've fallen in love with you. I know it hasn't been long, but I'm sure of my feelings. I've never been more sure of anything." Joy flooded through Grace, so intense she felt lightheaded. "I love you too, Ethan. I think I started falling for you the moment you helped me to my feet in Wild Water." His smile was radiant as he pulled her gently into his arms. Their first kiss was tender and sweet, a promise exchanged beneath the vast western sky. The next morning, Grace attended church services beside Ethan, aware of the knowing smiles that greeted them. News traveled fast in small towns, and their courtship was now officially acknowledged. After the service, they walked to Martha's house for Sunday dinner, hand in hand. "I've asked your aunt for permission to court you properly," Ethan told her as they strolled. She seemed pleased. Grace laughed. "She's been dropping hints about you since the day I arrived. I think she's fancied herself quite the matchmaker." The weeks turned to months, and as winter settled over Copper Creek, Grace's cottage behind the boarding house was finally ready for habitation. Though small, it had been transformed with Martha's help into a cozy home, with curtains at the windows and a braided rug before the hearth. "It's perfect," Grace told her aunt as they put the finishing touches on the bedroom. "I can't thank you enough for everything." Martha patted her cheek affectionately. "Having you here has been a blessing, child. This town needed a school, and I needed family." She paused, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Though I suspect I may be losing you to another home before too long." Grace blushed. "Aunt Martha." "Oh, please. That man looks at you like you hung the moon. Sheriff Granger may be taking his time, but mark my words, he'll be proposing before spring." As Christmas approached, Ethan became strangely distant, often distracted during their evenings together. Grace tried not to worry, telling herself he was simply busy with his duties, but a seed of doubt began to grow. Had he changed his mind about their relationship? 2 days before Christmas, as heavy snow blanketed the town, Ethan failed to appear for their planned dinner at Martha's. Grace paced anxiously by the window, watching as the snow piled higher and the streets emptied of people seeking shelter from the storm. "He'll be fine," Martha assured her, though concern tinged her voice. "Probably helping someone stranded by the weather." When a knock finally came at the door near midnight, Grace rushed to open it, relief flooding through her at the sight of Ethan standing on the porch, snow covering his hat and shoulders. "Thank goodness," she breathed. "I was so worried." "I'm sorry," he said, stomping snow from his boots before entering. "Had to help the Miller family after their wagon broke down outside town. They're safe at the hotel now." Martha appeared in the hallway, tying her robe. "Sheriff, you look half frozen. Come warm yourself by the fire. I'll make some coffee." Later, after Martha had tactfully retired to her room, Grace and Ethan sat before the dying fire, mugs of coffee warming their hands. "You've seemed troubled lately," Grace ventured carefully. "Is everything all right?" Ethan stared into the flames. "Been doing a lot of thinking." He set his mug aside and reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that glinted in the firelight. "Was going to wait until Christmas, but seeing your face when you opened that door tonight, I realized I don't want to wait another day." Grace's breath caught as he moved to kneel before her chair, holding up a simple gold ring with a small pearl at its center. "Grace Zimmerman, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Joy and relief crashed through her in a dizzying wave. "Yes," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Yes, Ethan, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I have something else for you," he said softly. "Close your eyes." She obeyed, hearing him move away and then return. Something light and delicate settled over her hair, cascading down around her shoulders. "Your mother's veil," he explained as she opened her eyes in surprise. "I had it cleaned and repaired in Tucson. Thought you might want to wear it when we marry." Tears spilled freely down her cheeks now, hidden behind the delicate lace. Ethan gently lifted the veil, his eyes filled with tenderness as he wiped away her tears. "I see you, Grace," he whispered. "All of you, your strength, your kindness, your sorrow, and your joy. And you're mine, as I am yours, now and always." They were married on New Year's Day, 1879, in the small church of Copper Creek. Grace wore her mother's wedding veil and a dress Martha had secretly been sewing for weeks. Ethan stood tall and proud in a new suit, his badge polished to a high shine on his chest. The entire town turned out for the celebration that followed, with tables groaning under the weight of food contributed by every household. There was dancing and laughter well into the night, a joyous beginning to the new year and their new life together. Spring brought new growth to Copper Creek, both literally, as the harsh winter gave way to wildflowers and green hills, and figuratively, as the town continued to prosper. The school now boasted 20 pupils, and Ethan had hired 2 deputies to help manage the increasing population. They had moved into a small house on the edge of town, close enough for both to walk to their respective duties, but with enough land for a garden and perhaps, someday, room for children to play. On their 6-month anniversary, Ethan surprised Grace with a picnic in the meadow where he had proposed during a summer thunderstorm. As they spread their blanket beneath a cottonwood tree, Grace watched her husband, marveling at how much her life had changed in a single year. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Granger?" Ethan asked, catching her gaze. "How strange life is," she replied, taking his hand. "If those bandits hadn't robbed the stagecoach in Wildwater, if you hadn't found me hiding my tears, I'd have found you somehow," he said with certainty. "Some things are just meant to be." As they shared their meal beneath the open sky, Grace silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought her west, to this wild and beautiful land, to this good and honorable man who had lifted her veil and seen straight to her heart. In the years that followed, Copper Creek would grow into a proper town with a railroad station and a brick schoolhouse where Grace Granger taught generations of children. Ethan would eventually become mayor after hanging up his sheriff's badge. They would raise 3 children of their own, each as strong and kind as their parents. But on that perfect spring day, all of that lay in the future, a future as wide and promising as the western sky above them, as they sat hand in hand, no longer hiding their tears or their hearts from one another.